Fragile peace. The morning sun spilled gently across the quiet streets of Willowbrook, a secluded suburb nestled just outside Boston. It was a neighborhood where lush green lawns and neat hedges whispered stories of stability and success, where every driveway glistened with well-kept cars and every porch bore the scent of fresh coffee. This world seemed protected from the chaos beyond its boundaries, wrapped in a gentle cocoon of comfort. Olivia Edwards had become the heart of her modest home at the end of Maple Lane. From the outside, Olivia seemed the embodiment of the classic suburban wife, reliable, attentive, and graceful. She moved with practiced ease through her morning routine, brewing coffee, flipping pancakes, and packing lunch for her son, Ethan. Even the family's golden retriever, Daisy, waited patiently by her side, a silent partner in the rhythm of their daily life. Each gesture was infused with quiet devotion. Olivia took pride in creating a refuge for her family, a place where her husband, Dr. Jonathan Edwards, could return each night from the world of fluorescent-lit hospital corridors and heavy responsibility. Jonathan, a renowned surgeon at the city's leading hospital, was adored among his colleagues and patients alike. In Willowbrook, he inspired admiration. To Olivia, he was her anchor, ambitious, composed, endlessly reassuring. Their neighbors often remarked on their apparent perfection. At weekend gatherings, Olivia's soft laughter would mingle with Jonathan's charming anecdotes, painting a convincing portrait of marital bliss. Friends envied her ability to manage a beautiful home, nurture a bright, well-mannered child, and support a husband whose career showed no sign of slowing down. Yet beneath this polished exterior, Olivia's life unfolded with a steady, unspoken pressure. She held herself to exacting standards, quietly tending to every detail, ensuring the pantry was stocked, the laundry folded just so, the appointments kept, and the school projects completed. She rarely complained, internalizing the mild disappointments and occasional loneliness that sometimes crept in during Jonathan's late nights or urgent calls to the hospital. Instead, she told herself this was the price of loving someone dedicated to saving lives, a small sacrifice for the blessings they shared. In private moments, the quiet after Ethan left for school, or the hush that settled over the house before bed, Olivia sometimes wondered if anyone truly noticed the invisible labor that stitched their world together. She had dreams once, of teaching, of painting, of traveling beyond the limits of their suburban routine, but these were carefully packed away, replaced with priorities her family needed. And so, she chose happiness in the life she built, determined to be the invisible force that kept everything running smoothly. As the day unfolded, the sun tracing patterns across polished floors, Olivia moved through her roles with gentle confidence. Those who saw her, neighbors, delivery drivers, the mailman, admired her poise. To them, she was the calm at the heart of a perfect American family. It seemed to all the world that Olivia's life was one of simple joy and unwavering tranquility. But sometimes, in the fragile stillness of Willowbrook, even the smallest tremor could reveal cracks beneath the surface, cracks only Olivia might sense as she poured another cup of coffee, watching the world wake up outside her window, determined to hold tight to the peace she'd worked so hard to create. The first crack. It began as the tiniest shift, barely noticeable, easy to dismiss. At first, Olivia noticed Jonathan's absence in subtle ways. The empty spot at the breakfast table, a mug left untouched. The sudden hush in the house when he slipped out before dawn or returned long after midnight. The air in their home, once comfortably predictable, now carried an unfamiliar tension, like the static that lingers before a summer storm. Jonathan's excuses sounded plausible enough. There were always meetings that ran late or emergencies at the hospital that demanded his presence. Olivia, ever understanding, would wrap his dinner and leave it warming in the oven, reassuring herself that these new, longer hours merely reflected the demands of his growing responsibilities. Yet beneath her rationale, a gentle tug of worry began to take root. The weekend rituals they once cherished gradually started to unravel. Where Saturday morning pancakes had been a family tradition, Jonathan now claimed exhaustion or urgent patient needs. On Sunday afternoons, instead of walks in the park with Ethan and Daisy, he was on call, lounging in his study with the door shut and his phone clutched tightly in his hand. Olivia noticed the change in Ethan too, a subdued disappointment, quickly masked when his father offered rushed, distracted affection. Small details began to gather in Olivia's mind, forming a pattern she tried to ignore. The subtle scent of a different cologne clinging to Jonathan's shirts. A new password on his cell phone, where once trust had let their lives intertwine without secrets. The shadow of a smile that flickered when he read messages behind closed doors. Even his wardrobe shifted, crisper shirts, new silk ties, more care in his appearance, yet never for the benefit of their evenings at home. Conversations between husband and wife, once lively and meandering, turned brief and utilitarian. Olivia's gentle questions, "How is your day? Is everything all right?" often met with vague replies or a weary shake of the head. Increasingly, she found herself alone at the kitchen table at night, the silence stretching between them growing heavier by the week. Still, Olivia stubbornly clung to ordinary routines. She continued to plan family dinners, schedule outings, celebrate small milestones, all with the hope that normalcy would coax Jonathan back to her. Each evening, she practiced patience, convincing herself that doctors carried invisible burdens, that stress could hollow a man's spirit, that these distant phases were temporary. She confided her worries only sparingly, mentioning Jonathan's absences to her sister on a Sunday phone call. Her voice light, but her heart weighed down by dread. Friends, glimpsing Olivia's composed smile at neighborhood gatherings, never guessed the sinking feeling she carried home afterwards. The atmosphere in the Edwards household became increasingly brittle. One wrong word or a broken gaze enough to splinter the calm. Olivia found herself inspecting every exchange, searching for reassurance in Jonathan's eyes, longing for a gentle touch or a lingering embrace. But more often than not, he escaped into work, into silence, into somewhere unreachable. Late at night, after tidying the last dish and locking the back door, Olivia stood by Ethan's bedroom, listening to the reassuring tempo of her son's breath. She ached to believe that all would be well if she just tried harder, loved more fiercely, waited more patiently. Yet, as she slipped into their darkened bedroom, her side of the bed turned cool and vast. She felt a fissure opening inside her, a quiet, dangerous crack. If Willowbrook had taught her anything, it was to preserve the facade of peace at all costs. And for now, Olivia told herself, she would do just that. The world would see what it wanted. The perfect home, the loving wife, the brilliant doctor. But in the creaking quiet of the night, with shadows dancing on the walls, Olivia could no longer ignore the trembling of something precious slipping through her fingers, leaving her with only questions and the chilling hint of what was to come. Bitter truth. Olivia had always believed that truth revealed itself quietly. A stilled voice, a strange look, or a tremor of intuition that pressed gently but firmly on the soul. But nothing could have prepared her for the brute force of the reality that crashed uninvited into her meticulously ordered life. It began one clouded afternoon in late autumn, when Willowbrook's golden trees shook with an oncoming storm, and Olivia found herself home alone, the steady hush of rain a backdrop to her thoughts. She moved about the house, dusting, folding, straightening, her motions more mechanical than mindful. Jonathan's absence had become routine, each evening punctuated by the hollow echo of his voice on the phone. "Don't wait up, Olivia. There's another surgery." She wanted to believe him, as she always had. She needed to. But while putting away his clean shirts, Olivia's hand brushed the inside pocket of a jacket she didn't recognize. Sleeker, expensive, newer than his usual taste. Her fingers curled around a folded slip of paper, a receipt from a boutique jewelry store downtown. Initials scribbled on the note weren't hers. Olivia's breath caught. Reason faltered, heart racing as each puzzle piece, strange scents, quiet phone calls, the restless energy in Jonathan's step, clinked loudly into place. Determined for clarity, she waited for him that night. As thunder rumbled overhead, she sat by the living room window, the dim glow of a single lamp sharpening every emotion. When Jonathan finally walked in, his hair damp with rain and his eyes evasive, Olivia felt her resolve steal within her. The confrontation was quieter than she imagined, but far colder. "Who is she, Jonathan?" Olivia's voice barely broke the silence. He froze, an imperceptible tightening to his jaw. At first he feigned confusion, but the evidence, a perfume bottle lurking between his things, unexplained dinner reservations, the changed password on his phone, left little room for denial. Even so, he offered only terse denial, a dismissive, almost practiced rebuff. "You're imagining things, Olivia. I'm working myself to exhaustion for this family." Unspoken truths hung between them, sharp and heavy as broken glass. That night, Olivia endured a solitude darker than she'd ever known before. The home she'd so carefully built was suddenly foreign, rooms echoing with the weight of broken trust. She pulled herself through the motions, making Ethan's lunch, stroking Daisy's golden fur, folding laundry, but none of the ordinary comforts brought relief. Waves of humiliation crashed over her as memories replayed in cruel new light. Jonathan's late-night absences, polite dismissals, and the way he'd almost seemed to grieve a life he still lived. Yet, within the gnawing heartache, a new, dangerous current began to stir. Olivia's tears dried quickly. In their place was a growing sense of clarity. The pain was raw, almost physical, but it sharpened her mind. The betrayal was a private storm, one she would have to walk through alone. For Ethan, for her own dignity, she bit back tears and projected calm. She resolved not to let anger rule her tongue in front of her son, even as inside her, a low, simmering anger pressed against the carefully painted walls of her composure. Sleep that night was a merciful escape, but dawn brought no relief. Alone in the pre-dawn gray, Olivia faced the bitter truth. Her marriage was a facade, as fragile and beautiful as spun glass. And she realized, with a cold certainty, that the crack had not merely appeared, it had split her world in two. Still, in that devastation, something else was born, a latent strength forged from the ashes of betrayal. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, Olivia began to consider the shape of the days to come and the cost of surviving the truth. The tragedy of divorce. The days that followed Olivia's discovery were marked by a strained, artificial normalcy. Jonathan retreated further behind the fortress of his career, answering questions with a tired sigh or an irritated glance. Olivia, now painfully aware of the distance between them, found herself moving through their home like a trespasser. Every framed photograph, every neatly arranged ornament, echoing memories of a life she no longer recognized. She tried to function for Ethan's sake. Mornings became a blur of routines, brushing hair, making toast, tying shoelaces. Each gesture performed with a gentle, almost desperate care. Olivia ached to shield her son from the unraveling beneath their roof, to preserve what little innocence he had left. But even at his young age, Ethan sensed a shift. His questions, "Will Daddy be home for dinner?" or "Why is Mommy sad?" cut deeper than any accusation. One Thursday afternoon, as gray clouds loomed above Willowbrook, a courier delivered a thick, official-looking envelope addressed to Olivia. She sat motionless on the living room sofa, thumb tracing its sealed edge, dread pooling in her stomach. She knew, even before she tore it open, what it contained. Formal divorce papers drawn up on Jonathan's behalf. The allegations were carefully worded yet devastating. Claims of neglect, emotional instability, and most shocking of all, subtle suggestions that Olivia was unfit to be Ethan's primary caregiver. Her hands shook as she read. It was a betrayal within a betrayal. A cruel, calculated move to seize the courtroom advantage. The man she had defended, trusted, and loved through years of sacrifice was now attempting to erase her, not just from his life, but from her own son's future. Olivia pressed the pages to her chest, a silent scream building inside her. For the first time, anger flared hot and clear in her veins. If Jonathan wanted war, he would have it. But she refused to become vindictive or lose her dignity. Hiring an attorney was a necessity, not a choice. The process was disorienting. Legal jargon, endless paperwork, and strategy meetings that left Olivia feeling exposed and helpless. Her lawyer, a sharp, compassionate woman named Evelyn, assured her they had a fighting chance, but cautioned her to brace for a brutal fight. Sometimes the ones with the power and the spotlight play dirtier than you can imagine, Evelyn warned. Olivia nodded, summoning whatever fragments of strength remained. The divorce proceedings unfolded with theatrical cruelty. Jonathan, backed by his formidable legal team, painted Olivia as a fragile, emotionally unstable woman incapable of coping with single motherhood. He cited her anxiety, moments of fatigue, even her devotion to household routines as evidence that she could not offer Ethan a stimulating environment. Meanwhile, his own transgressions, the late nights, the callous withdrawal, the affair, were conveniently omitted or spun as professional burdens. Olivia sat in the sterile, intimidating courtroom, her heart ricocheting between outrage and disbelief. On the witness stand, she spoke with as much clarity as she could muster, defending her love for Ethan, her role in his life, and her tireless efforts to provide stability. She refused to lash out at Jonathan, even as he avoided her gaze, his testimony chillingly detached. Olivia's composure, though admired by some, was twisted by the opposition as coldness, a lack of passion, a supposed unwillingness to fight for her child. Friends from Willowbrook, neighbors who'd once envied the Edwards family, watched the proceedings from a safe distance, whispering in hushed tones. Some offered support, dropping off meals or texting words of comfort, but most disappeared, unwilling to involve themselves in the private collapse of a perfect family. Olivia learned, painfully, that in the suburbs' rigid hierarchy, respect was as fleeting as the morning sun. Each day in court chipped away at Olivia's hope. She returned home exhausted, her mind replaying every word, every accusation, every legal twist she hadn't seen coming. In the quiet dark, she clung to Ethan, reading him bedtime stories, pressing kisses to his sleeping forehead, memorizing every detail of his little face. She began to keep a journal, pouring onto the pages her fear and frustration, refusing to let the mounting injustice snuff out her spirit. The final hearing arrived on a bleak March morning. Olivia dressed carefully in a simple, elegant dress, blue, the color of clarity and calm. She locked eyes with Jonathan for a brief, searing moment before the judge entered, her heart pounding in her chest. The judge, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, delivered his verdict in deliberate, impersonal tones. Full custody was awarded to Jonathan, with Olivia granted weekend visitation and a meager allotment of holidays. For a moment, Olivia felt the room tilt, the air sucked out of her lungs. She stared at the floor, not trusting herself to speak. Her lawyer squeezed her hand, but the gesture barely registered. Jonathan accepted the decision with a victorious nod, already scanning his phone as if the last ties of their marriage, their family, were just another task completed. Out in the corridor, Olivia bent over, her body racked with silent sobs. The loss was unfathomable, a rupture impossible to mend. Her mind reeled. How could the truth matter so little? How could a courtroom, built to protect the vulnerable, feel so coldly indifferent? Yet, even as despair threatened to swallow her whole, Olivia found a strange, stubborn resolve flickering inside her. She would not let this decision define the rest of her life. In the days that followed, moving out of the house that had once been a sanctuary became an exercise in heartbreak. Olivia packed Ethan's old toys, family photographs, even the faded art projects he'd left taped to the kitchen fridge. Each item was a memory, sweetness laced with bitterness, proof of a life she fought to hold together, now irreparably broken. Saying goodbye to Ethan was the cruelest blow. On the morning he left with Jonathan, Olivia knelt and held him close, memorizing the weight of his small body, the warmth of his little hands. "I love you, sweetheart. I will always be here for you," she whispered, praying her voice would steady his fears, even as her own heart shattered. Ethan clung to her, blinking away tears, then was led to the shiny car waiting at the curb. The silence that followed their departure was absolute. Olivia wandered from room to room, hollow with grief, her identity as wife and mother now in tatters. She faced the emptiness without flinching. Tears fell, but she refused to let them become her only story. There was nothing left to hide behind, nothing left to lose. Yet, in this darkest hour, a seed of purpose stirred. Olivia realized that survival was not enough. She needed, somehow, to reclaim her dignity, to fight for her future, and to gather the scattered pieces of her old self. The tragedy of divorce was not the end, she told herself as she wiped her eyes and opened the front door to the crisp, uncertain light beyond. It was merely the breaking point, the beginning of a battle she hadn't chosen, but would find the strength, in time, to win. Rebuilding a life. The quiet of Olivia's new apartment was nothing like the hush of her old family home. Here, stillness did not mean comfort. It echoed with the loss of routines, of laughter, of the warm, everyday chaos that once filled her days. The beige walls were bare, save for a single photo of Ethan, carefully placed on her nightstand. In this strange, liminal space, Olivia began the long, uneven process of building something new from the ruins. She found herself sleepwalking through the first few mornings, navigating boxes instead of familiar hallways, scrambling eggs in a cramped kitchenette rather than the sunlit kitchen she had loved. The sound of Daisy's paws, her only constant companion, clattered on tile, a small comfort in a world turned foreign. Olivia tried to summon her old sense of order, but grief made even simple things feel insurmountable. She forced herself to make coffee, to open the curtains, to step onto the tiny balcony and just breathe. But time, relentless and unyielding, tumbled forward, and gradually determination began to stir within the fog of heartbreak. Olivia realized that she could not stay suspended in sadness. Ethan needed at least one parent to be steady, hopeful, and alive. She owed herself the chance to become whole again, even if she had to do it alone. The job hunt was humbling. Years spent prioritizing family meant her resume was thin, her skills rusty. Still, Olivia pressed on, applying for teaching assistant positions at local schools and administrative work at offices all over the city. Each rejection stung, a reminder of all she had given up and all that had been taken from her. But she persisted, updating her wardrobe with a thrifted suit, practicing her interview answers in front of the bathroom mirror, willing herself to believe she was capable of more than just managing a home. After weeks of searching, a principal at a neighborhood elementary school called to offer her a position as a classroom aide. It was not glamorous work, the pay was modest, the tasks often tedious, yet the rhythm of school life, the ringing bells, the shouts of children on the playground, the soft, hopeful chaos of lessons and questions began to knit Olivia back together. She found joy in small triumphs, helping a shy student read aloud for the first time, organizing colorful bulletin boards, eating lunch under the gentle gaze of the old oak tree out back. She left the building each afternoon tired, but with a quiet sense of accomplishment she'd almost forgotten. The clang of emptiness greeted her each evening, but Olivia made new patterns. She video called Ethan every night at 7 homework, eager for any glimpse of him. They traded stories, his about science class, soccer games, and funny moments with Daisy on weekends, hers about favorite books and the adventures she hoped they'd one day share. Each call was a lifeline, and each goodbye left her aching but thankful for technology's thin thread across the chasm. Seeing Jonathan's name appear in headlines stung in a way Olivia hadn't anticipated. He appeared on magazine covers, the surgeon of the year, flanked by his bright-eyed new partner. Social media feeds showed a curated tableau of success. Charity events, gleaming hospital wings, picture-perfect smiles. Olivia scrolled through them with numb detachment at first, and then with a bitter sense of injustice. She did not hate him, not yet, but seeing him so effortlessly rebuild a dazzling life while she struggled for each unremarkable day felt like a cruel trick of fate. The world whispered about her too, but in different, quieter ways. Olivia Edwards, that poor woman. She never looked happy, did she? Neighborhood gossip spread subtle blame. Old friends drifted. Invitations became scarce. Olivia learned to be her own friend, to sit in coffee shops alone with her book, to go for walks in the neighboring park, finding solace in the shifting seasons. Money was a constant worry. Jonathan paid child support on paper, but legal fees and moving expenses had gnawed through her savings. Olivia shopped with coupons, mended her own clothes, carefully measured out every trip to the grocery store. Yet, there was pride in her independence. Even the smallest victories, like fixing a leaky faucet on her own or negotiating with the building manager for a little more sunlight, felt like declarations of resilience. Daisy needed care, too. The loyal golden retriever was Olivia's anchor, greeting her after work with an unspoken understanding, curling at her feet during sleepless nights. They became a pair inseparable, their lives marked by long evening walks. Sometimes Olivia talked aloud as they wandered, giving voice to her fears or rehearsing questions she might someday ask Jonathan, not for answers, she realized, but for the dignity of speaking her truth. Therapy sessions filled some of the harder hours. Olivia found herself sitting across from a gentle-eyed woman with a notebook, at first reticent, then pouring out grief, anger, guilt, and longing. With time, those sessions mapped a new territory, a place where Olivia was not just the ex-wife, but a complex woman with her own needs, memories, and capacity for hope. She learned to claim anger without letting it consume her, to honor sorrow, but also to search for happiness, even in unlikely places. Her relationship with Ethan, although changed, became a project of healing. Weekend visits were bittersweet but fiercely protected. Olivia tried not to compete with Jonathan. She focused on shared joys: baking cookies, painting canvases in sunlit corners, reading favorite stories late into the night. She refused to ask about Jonathan's new partner, resisted the urge to demand confessions or details. Instead, she built a haven for Ethan, a space where he could mourn the family that was and find peace with the family that remained. There were setbacks, too. Nights when Ethan cried for home, when schoolwork was left unfinished, or when Olivia found herself staring at the ceiling, hollowed out by loneliness and regret. On those nights, she wrote long letters she never meant to send. Letters to Jonathan, to her younger self, to the version of Olivia who believed love was enough to keep everything together. Each letter was a letting go, a silent declaration that she would not let bitterness shape her future. Weeks slipped into months, and new things slowly filled the empty spaces. Pots of basil and thyme on the windowsill, a patched quilt on the couch, laughter over Sunday pancakes made just for two. Olivia joined a book club at the local library, made friends with other single mothers at school events, and once even let herself dance, clumsily, joyously, at a neighbor's wedding. She was not the same woman she had been. She was more fragile in some ways and unimaginably stronger in others. Some mornings, she still woke with the echo of old wounds aching, but each day, Olivia made the conscious choice not to surrender to regret. She knew the road ahead would be long and unpredictable. Solitude punctuated by small, hard-won joys. Her story was no longer one of silent sacrifice, but of slow, stubborn resilience, a testament to a heart that refused to be broken for good. In the gentle light of late afternoon, as she watered her plants and watched Daisy snooze in a patch of sun, Olivia allowed herself a tentative smile. She could not reclaim her old life, nor would she want to. What waited for her was unknown, but it was hers alone. A life rebuilt, not from forgiveness or vengeance, but from courage, perseverance, and the oldest hope of all, that happiness, however fragile, was still possible. Light in the darkness. By the time spring returned to Willowbrook, Olivia Edwards was a different woman from the one who had once stood watch over her perfect suburban home. The wounds from her divorce had scabbed over, but not yet healed. She moved through her days with purpose: work, Ethan, Daisy, therapy, stolen scraps of contentment. But a persistent ache lingered beneath the surface. Evenings alone in her small apartment had sharpened her into someone both softer and stronger, capable of patience and anger, resilience and doubt. It was one of those evenings, just as dusk pressed against her window, that Olivia found herself untangling the past once again. She was sorting through a dusty file box, buried in the back of her closet, searching for tax records. The rhythm of ordinary life was a comfort now, something solid to hold on to on nights when memory threatened to overwhelm her. Daisy snoozed nearby, tail twitching in quiet dreams as Olivia shuffled through old envelopes and receipts. Her hands paused over a thick manila folder she didn't recognize. Frowning, Olivia slid it free and opened it with a practiced wariness. It contained a handful of Jonathan's hospital files, mixed in with newsletters and charity invitations Olivia had habitually saved to keep their home paper-free. As she sifted through the folder, a thin stack of documents caught her eye. Forms marked confidential, stamped with the logo of the hospital's internal review board. Olivia's heart thudded as she scanned the top page. It described irregularities in medication orders for a handful of Jonathan's patients. Her ex-husband's name was circled in red ink, questions scrawled in the margins about unapproved expenses and questionable authorizations. There was a chilling thoroughness to the review, a tone Olivia recognized from Jonathan's own voice. the careful buildup of a case, the implication of secrets buried beneath jargon and bureaucracy. The next sheet was even more damning. A letter addressed to Jonathan from the hospital's compliance officer, demanding clarification for a patient's readmission following post-operative complications. It was signed and dated not long before the affair, before their marriage had imploded. Olivia felt a tremor of dread. As she leafed through the rest of the folder, she found receipts for prescriptions under unusual names, vouchers for expensive dinners billed as hospital expenses, and email printouts referencing urgent discussions about patient outcomes. She recognized some of the names, patients she'd seen at Jonathan's holiday charity functions, families whose holiday cards had arrived in their mailbox over the years. Olivia closed her eyes, willing her mind to quiet. The full weight of what she'd discovered hadn't yet settled, but she knew enough to understand the magnitude. For months, even years, she'd told herself she'd been blind to the cracks in her marriage, had missed the invisible unraveling. Now she faced a different sort of blindness, the realization that her ex-husband's betrayals extended beyond their home, that the man she'd once loved had built his reputation, maybe even his fame, on a foundation quietly riddled with fraud and recklessness. She spent that night in restless silence, the documents neatly stacked on her kitchen counter. Anger flared, but so did confusion and an old, stubborn loyalty. Jonathan was still Ethan's father. Whatever happened, whatever he'd done, exposing this side of him would mean not only justice, but destruction, public scandal, the collapse of his career, and perhaps lasting scars for their already fractured family. Over the next days, Olivia carried the secret like a stone in her chest. The urge for revenge flickered in her thoughts. Who would blame her for wanting Jonathan, the man who had humiliated and abandoned her, finally held accountable? He'd taken everything from her. Her marriage, her home, her time with Ethan. The thought of him falling from his undeserved pedestal was tantalizing, an imagined taste of vindication. But the decision weighed heavily. As much as Olivia wanted justice, she recoiled from the idea of tearing someone apart, even someone who had shown her so little mercy. The world she lived in was unfriendly to women who sought retribution. She'd seen that firsthand in the courtroom, felt it whispered in her children's school hallways and at supermarket checkouts. Did she want Ethan to see her as the mother who ruined his father? Would her son understand, ever? The price of silence versus the cost of exposure? She sought counsel, the only way she knew how. At her next therapy session, Olivia told her story haltingly, careful never to use Jonathan's name. Her therapist listened, silent and intent, then asked her what outcome she truly wanted. For herself, for Ethan, for the invisible victims hidden in those hospital records. Peace, Olivia admitted finally, and fairness. I want what's right, but I don't want to lose myself chasing justice. I don't want to become cold. Her therapist nodded, suggesting Olivia take her time. Sometimes, darkness can only be driven away by a steady, honest light, not by setting more fires. Those words lingered with Olivia in the weeks that followed. She went about her life, letting the question turn over and over in her mind, trying to untangle vengeance from truth, pain from principle. She watched Ethan in their living room on weekends, how he looked for his father's approval in every story, every soccer goal, every drawing on the fridge. She thought of the hospital patients she'd met at charity events, the trust they'd placed in her husband's care. Late one night, gazing out at the city lights, Olivia came to a fragile decision. She could not erase the shadows Jonathan had cast, but she could try to let a little light in, for her sake, for Ethan's, for the people who unknowingly depended on honesty and accountability. She would not act out of revenge or bitterness, but she would not let fear or old love make her complicit in the harm he had done. There was hope, she realized slowly, in refusing the easy path, in stepping toward the truth, even when it meant leaving comfort and safety behind. The darkness that had threatened to swallow her future now seemed oddly thinned, streaked with the possibility of something better, of renewal, restoration, and the fierce, quiet pride that came from doing what was right, even when no one was watching. For the first time in years, Olivia felt a quiet lightness, a sense that she could begin to shape her future on her own terms. As dawn crept through the blinds, she gathered the documents, placed them in a new folder, and slid it into her bag. She was not sure what would come next, or who would stand with her as she did what needed to be done. But she had discovered, in the midst of uncertainty, an answer she could live with, a small, steadfast light against the dark. The revenge plan. Olivia was never a woman drawn to vengeance, not in the melodramatic sense so often written in novels or whispered about in gossipy circles. Yet as spring deepened and the world outside her apartment came alive with blossoms, she found herself standing at the crossroads between forgiveness and justice. In her heart, it felt less like plotting revenge and more like setting something crooked right, refusing to let Jonathan's carefully constructed house of lies define the limits of her own life, and more important, the future her son would one day inherit. The folder of damning evidence became the gravitational center of Olivia's days. She would find herself gazing at it through the haze of early morning or late at night, her fingers tracing its edges on the kitchen counter, a strange talisman both of all she had lost and of everything she might yet change. Sleep became elusive, dreams frayed by images of courtroom battles, tabloid headlines, hospital conference rooms filled with angry administrators, and Ethan's confused, frightened face. She decided to move methodically, almost clinically, just as Jonathan would, she thought with an ironic twist, beginning with research. Olivia spent quiet evenings at her laptop, learning the difference between internal hospital reviews and criminal investigations, reading survivors' testimonials about speaking up against powerful adversaries, and following news stories where whistleblowers had both triumphed and paid terrible prices. The world, it seemed, was awash in secrets. She didn't want to become a cautionary tale buried on page 10 of a newspaper, nor did she want to become the kind of shrill, vengeful woman people would discredit instantly. So Olivia did what she had always done best. She planned. She began to quietly collect more evidence, combing through old correspondence, credit card statements, family calendars, and emails still lingering in her deleted folders. She kept meticulous notes of every connection, every suspicious transaction, every name or procedure that set off alarm bells. She created a separate email account under a pseudonym, cautious, careful, unwilling to leave a trail that Jonathan or his hospital network could trace. The hardest part was doing all this while maintaining a facade of normalcy. By day, she attended work, circulated in the break room with colleagues, and tackled the ever-changing needs of the students she aided. Afternoons were spent helping Ethan with homework, cooking quiet dinners for two, and walking Daisy in the fading daylight. At school pickup or on the sidewalk, she wore her mask of calm, polite but distant, never hinting at the battle brewing beneath the surface. But at night, when the city had settled and the world was hers again, Olivia allowed herself to plot. She made a list of potential allies, mentally sorting acquaintances and professionals into columns. Those who valued truth, those who needed proof, those who would succumb to pressure or proximity to power. She reached out discreetly to a former neighbor who had worked at the hospital, requesting a coffee meetup on the pretext of catching up. Their conversation was careful, Nothing overt, but Olivia left with the distinct impression that rumors still lingered about Jonathan. The world, she realized, might be primed for the story, if only she could control its release. She sought counsel from Evelyn, her divorce attorney, who listened gravely, her voice dropping to a hush despite Olivia's secure apartment walls. "You'll need more than good intentions," Evelyn warned. "This will not be about justice or healing, at least not at first. It'll be about leverage, narrative, and protecting yourself." They discussed whistleblower protections, the potential for retaliation, the emotional toll. But beneath the caution, a subtle current of admiration ran through Evelyn's words. Knowing all this, Olivia moved to step 2. She began reaching out, anonymously at first, to journalists who had reputations for integrity and persistence. Her messages were carefully worded, presenting herself as a source with credible information about systemic medical fraud and patient risk at a respected Boston hospital. She offered to prove her credibility, to meet in person if trust could be established, and never revealed any names in these initial exchanges. Most reporters never wrote back. 2 did. One, from a regional news magazine, offered to meet in a public park, just to talk off the record. Olivia met the reporter under a flowering dogwood, the city bustling in the background, her nerves covered by a crisp blue blazer she'd borrowed from a thrift store. She produced a handful of redacted documents, enough to suggest a scandal, but not enough to compromise her own safety. The reporter, a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and a notebook that never left her hand, listened for nearly an hour, asking questions but never pressing for names. "If and when you want to go on the record, we'll run it by legal first," she promised. Olivia left feeling both lighter and more afraid. The train had left the station and she was no longer alone in what she knew. Her next step was more personal, and in many ways, harder. Olivia began gently contacting families whose names she recognized from the hospital files, those who might have suffered silent losses or unexplained complications during Jonathan's tenure. She crafted precise, compassionate messages, offering herself as a confidential contact if they ever wanted to discuss their experiences. She received no answers at first. Then, slowly, one woman replied, a grieving mother whose child had died after surgery. Their subsequent call was laden with shared pain, suspicion, and tentative hope. "I just want real answers," the woman whispered. Olivia's anger sharpened into focus. With each moving piece, Olivia waited for the right moment. She learned through the local news that Jonathan was in line for a prestigious hospital promotion, one that would catapult him into the regional spotlight, a fact that filled her with bitter satisfaction. The timing became clear. If she revealed everything now, the scandal would do the most damage, not just to Jonathan's reputation, but to the institution that had looked away. The night before she handed the final folder to the reporter, Olivia stood at her apartment window, looking at the city gleaming with anticipation and anxiety. She thought of Ethan, of Daisy, of the quiet resilience she'd cultivated from so much loss. She did not want to be known as a destroyer, but as a protector, and at last, as her own person. Sometimes the truth burns before it cleanses, she thought, her resolve tightening with the sunrise. The next morning, Olivia walked calmly into the agreed-upon law office, folder in hand. Her body shivered with the consequence of what she was about to do, but her mind was clear. Each detail documented, every contact already mapped out in her mind. No matter what happened, public scandal, lawsuits, messy headlines, she would know she had spoken not from rage, but from a fierce love for what deserved protecting. For the first time in years, Olivia felt powerful, not invincible, not untouched by fear or pain, but sure of herself in ways she never had been before. This was not the revenge the world expected. It was justice, pursued slowly and with care, light kindled in the heart of darkness, a future rewritten on her own, uncompromised terms. The truth exposed. The morning the scandal erupted, the air in Willowbrook was unseasonably crisp and bright, the sunlight bouncing blindingly off Olivia's kitchen window. She awoke to a familiar tension in her chest, but as she scrolled through her newsfeed for the day's headlines, a single story ignited her phone screen, its font bold and undeniable. Prominent Boston surgeon under investigation for fraud, patient endangerment. For a long moment, Olivia sat perfectly still, feeling the world tilt beneath her. She had spent nights bracing for this possibility, rehearsing what-ifs, imagining vindication mingled with fear. But now, it was real, impossible to take back or contain. The article swiftly circulated, its details built from the evidence she'd quietly collected. Financial irregularities, manipulated patient records, unexplained complications, and hospital leaders scrambling to save face. Jonathan's name was attached to every paragraph, his image already becoming the symbol of far larger rot. Within hours, the phone calls began. Journalists left voicemails, requests for comment, for interviews, for a personal angle on the crumbling facade. Former neighbors sent awkward texts. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." Olivia's mother called in panic, her voice trembling between pride and terror. "Liv, are you safe? Should I come into the city?" Olivia steadied herself, determined not to let chaos dictate her choices. She watched, outwardly calm, as the news camera crews set up outside the hospital, figures in suits dodging microphones, staffers exiting with grim faces. By noon, the hospital's public relations team released a terse statement. "A thorough internal investigation is underway. We are committed to the highest standards of patient care and integrity." It was damage control, nothing more, and everyone knew it. That afternoon, the school principal asked Olivia to step into her office, concern flickering across her face. "Is there anything you need?" she asked gently. "I'm sure this is difficult with the children and the press." Olivia appreciated the gesture but refused to break down. "I'm fine," she replied, masking the exhaustion and the old wounds that ached anew beneath her skin. Her job, her fragile, hard-won normalcy, became a refuge, a place where she could focus on others' needs and remember the parts of herself untouched by marriage, scandal, or vengeance. The most difficult calls were those with Ethan. Jonathan, predictably, had gone silent in the wake of the news. On their evening video chat, Ethan's face was pale, his voice small. "Mom, is Dad in trouble? The kids at school saw something about him on the news." Olivia hesitated, careful to shield her son from the uglier truths. "Your dad is having a very difficult time right now. But I promise you, this isn't your fault, and I'm always here for you, no matter what." She soothed him as best she could, making room for his confusion and heartbreak, bearing the weight of questions she could not answer. As the days passed, the reckoning grew. Jonathan's hospital privileges were suspended. The medical board announced an external audit. Lawsuits began trickling in, families demanding answers for unexplained deaths, for bills laden with fees they'd never understood. Olivia's phone lit up with notifications whenever a new story broke, podcasts debating medical ethics, columnists dissecting the fall of a golden couple, anonymous voices speculating in online forums. Through it all, Olivia maintained a mask of composure. She did not gloat, nor did she collapse into bitterness. She moved quietly through the world, aware that eyes followed her, at school drop-off, at the grocery store, even on lonely dog walks with Daisy through the neighborhood park. Some people avoided her, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the accusations against her former husband. Others offered sympathy that skirted the edges of curiosity. The same people who'd once envied her life now grateful, perhaps, for the chaos not seeping into their own. Jonathan, for his part, barely reached out, retreating behind dense walls of legal counsel and public silence. When he finally called, the conversation was clipped, transactional. He pleaded for her discretion. "You know they'll come after everyone connected to me. I need you to—" Olivia cut him off, her voice low and steady. "You built this. I won't lie for you." For the first time, she felt nothing. No love, no rage, just a hollow relief. Meanwhile, the media's attention shifted to Jonathan's lover, whose name had surfaced in connection with questionable financial transactions. Photos of the two of them, once radiant with secrecy and success, were now pored over for evidence of guilt. Olivia pitied her, in a way. Every relationship had its shadows. This one was simply collapsing in the blinding light of day. Yet Olivia was not unscathed by all the exposure. The investigation turned up painful details she hadn't known, and the sense of violation was acute. Years of her own emails and texts, dissected for meaning, twisted by strangers for clicks and headlines. Sometimes at night, anxiety slipped in. Had she done the right thing? Would Ethan someday resent her for choosing truth over comfort? But each time doubt crept near, Olivia anchored herself in her motive. She had not chosen this disaster, but she would not shield the powerful from consequences, especially when others had suffered. Gradually, as the initial storm passed, a quieter recognition began to take hold in her circle. Teachers praised Olivia's professionalism, and parents she barely knew emailed kind words of solidarity. Her therapist marveled at her resilience. "You did something extraordinarily difficult, Olivia. Not everyone would have had the courage." She began to hear from people affected by Jonathan's deception. Other women, former patients' families, some messages filled with grief, others simply gratitude for cracking the silence. Each word made her feel less alone and reminded her that the truth, once exposed, could begin its slow work of healing. There were, of course, costs. Financial uncertainty deepened as her own legal bills rose. Social invitations were rare. Friends from the old neighborhood seemed to vanish. The world she once knew, its routines, its rules, was gone. Olivia mourned it privately, planting new rituals as she learned to savor autonomy. Saturday morning walks in the park with Daisy, fresh flowers on her windowsill. Laughter with Ethan on weekends unmarred by pretense. In the end, Olivia watched Jonathan's downfall from a distance, neither vindictive nor triumphant. There was no satisfaction in seeing her son's father broken, only the somber clarity that some truths, once unearthed, change everything. Each day, she stitched together a new understanding of strength. That light was not absence of darkness, but the bravery to face it and let something better grow in the ashes. As summer approached, the headlines moved on and the world's gaze shifted elsewhere. Olivia felt, for the first time in a long while, a cautious peace. She had chosen the harder path and survived. The truth, once her burden, was now her shield, and with it, the hope that this chapter, though marked by heartbreak and havoc, would be the foundation for something entirely her own. Roses on the ashes. The shockwave from the scandal had finally faded into silence by the time autumn crept into the city. What was left in the wake of the storm was neither devastation nor triumph, but something far subtler. The tangled beginnings of a new life rising from the scorched landscape Olivia once called home. Those first mornings after the headlines vanished were strangely peaceful and lonely at once. Olivia would sit on her small balcony with Daisy at her feet, watching the maple trees paint the street below in reds and golds. There was no morning rush, no lunches to pack for Ethan, no half-heard arguments in the hallway, no phone calls from lawyers, no anxious scanning of news feeds or neighborhood gossip. For the first time in years, silence felt generous. Slowly, Olivia began to gather the overlooked blessings of this new existence. Her apartment, formerly a refuge from chaos, started to feel like a place to grow, not simply hide. She bought a few flowering plants at a street market, delighting in the unruly green leaves and delicate rosebuds that flourished on her sunlit windowsill. She spent lazy evenings tending to their care, her hands finding solace in the earth, her mind in the scent of new life. The roses, sometimes half wild, sometimes stubbornly beautiful, became her quiet symbol, hope persisting, color blooming where only loss had seemed possible before. As the months unspooled, Olivia discovered an unexpected freedom in solitude. She no longer moved through the world as someone's shadow, or as the echo of a former role. She was simply herself, unmoored and unfinished. The anxiety that had once haunted her, a constant worry that she wasn't enough or was too much, began to subside. She learned to cook for pleasure again, to play music on Sunday mornings, to invite sunlight in through every window. She redecorated slowly, a new chair, bright throw pillows, the odd painting from a second-hand shop. Nothing matched perfectly, and nothing needed to. The wound with Ethan required patience and faith. Their relationship, tested and redefined by so much upheaval, gradually settled into a delicate, resilient bond. Olivia made their time together count, chopping apples for crisp pies, helping him build model airplanes, coaxing him to share the small, complicated pieces of his week. There were setbacks, tantrums, homesick tears, quiet moments where Ethan stared out the window and asked questions Olivia couldn't always answer. But there was laughter too, and shared silly rituals. Inside jokes spun over board games, whispered chats under late-night blankets. The kind of gentle intimacy that can only grow after weathering a storm. It was not lost on Olivia how much she had changed. She no longer looked for validation in Jonathan's opinion or in the judgmental glances of neighbors. She had become, piece by piece, her own ally. That strength, honed in heartbreak, was not the brittle, defensive armor she might have built, but a steadier, more enduring resilience. She allowed herself to feel joy without guilt and grief without shame. Her work at the elementary school became an unexpected source of pride and purpose. With the scandal fading into the background, Olivia was free to invest fully in her students. She spent afternoons tutoring those who struggled, organized small art projects for the quieter children, and spearheaded a community garden initiative on the school's tiny plot of grass. This work, unspectacular and largely unseen, was deeply rewarding. The trust of children, she realized, was as fragile and precious as any treasure. The more she gave, the more she felt herself restored. Slowly, her social circle shifted and expanded. The friends who had vanished during the worst days were quietly replaced by new faces. Other single parents, teaching colleagues, women from her book club who brought over soup and cookies on Friday nights. These were friends who understood failure and new beginnings, who carried their own scars with humor and grace. Olivia found comfort in their company, their vulnerability, their willingness to laugh at life's absurdities, their refusal to let a single story define them. Financially, life was never easy, but it grew less precarious. Accepting help from others, secondhand clothes, a ride home after work, advice about mortgages and rent, was something Olivia learned to do with gratitude rather than embarrassment. Over time, she paid forward these kindnesses, finding pride in small acts of generosity, volunteering at the library, donating gently used toys to families who needed them, helping an elderly neighbor with her shopping. In this cycle of giving and receiving, she felt herself rooted once more in community, not as a recipient of pity, but as a contributor of strength. Jonathan's name rarely entered her thoughts. When it did, it was less a source of pain than a distant echo, a reminder of everything she had survived and of the woman she'd become in the aftermath. She no longer wished for revenge or even for vindication. Instead, Olivia silently thanked the universe for clarity and for the lessons born out of loss. Occasionally, she saw Jonathan in news clips or overheard his name in conversations, but it no longer quickened her heartbeat or soured her mood. She had let go. The real transformation was quieter, built in the everyday grace of choosing happiness despite uncertainty. Olivia had come to understand that healing was not a single dramatic moment, but a slow process, one that required tending, like her roses. There were setbacks, lonely nights, paperwork that threatened to overwhelm, sudden flashes of regret or longing for a life that would never return. But there were small, hard-won victories, too. Ethan's spontaneous laughter, a compliment from a colleague, a morning spent reading by the window with Daisy curled nearby. On the anniversary of the verdict, Olivia treated herself and Ethan to a day trip outside the city. They hiked a forest trail, picnic basket in hand, stopping to gather wildflowers and watch deer move silently between the trees. At one point, Ethan asked, "Are you happy, Mom?" Olivia looked at her son. Not a symbol of loss, but a living reminder of hope and love, both fragile and resilient. She smiled, squeezing his hand. "I am. I really am." That night, as dusk settled and laughter echoed in her small apartment, Olivia looked at her blooming windowsill roses, soft, persistent, growing atop soil that had once been nothing but a graveyard of dreams. She realized that what she had built wasn't a return to what was lost, but a bold, imperfect, and beautiful new beginning. There was peace, stillness, and unexpected contentment growing at the heart of her life. Where the fire of tragedy had passed, the roses had finally claimed the ashes as their own. Cost and forgiveness. It wasn't until the first icy winds of winter swept down through Willowbrook that Olivia truly comprehended how much had changed. The streets, now dusted with frost and fallen leaves, reflected a life that was simpler, quieter, and altogether more honest. Yet, beneath the steady rhythm of her new normalcy, old wounds continued to ache, especially as the holidays neared, a season that once signified togetherness and now seemed to cast a colder light on everything that had come before. In the weeks after the verdict and the slow retreat of public scandal, Olivia found herself haunted by unexpected memories. She saw Jonathan everywhere, not in person, but in echoes. A fleeting cologne scent at the supermarket, the cadence of laughter at a dinner party, even Ethan's stubbornness during a homework battle. Life had moved on for everyone, yet for Olivia it sometimes felt like she was the only one still paying the price for the truth. One late evening, when Ethan was away for the weekend, and the old ache of loneliness returned, Jonathan called out of the blue. He sounded weary, older. There was no swagger in his tone. There was nothing left at stake between them now, and for the first time in years, Jonathan spoke without armor. He asked about Ethan, about Daisy, about Olivia's life. The conversation was awkward at first, full of halting pauses and regret. Then, tentatively, he began to make his apologies. Not for everything. Jonathan was still Jonathan, but enough to crack the surface. "I know I've hurt you," he began, his voice thick with something Olivia recognized as real. "I know it's too late to undo any of it. I lost you, and I lost our home. Sometimes I wonder if there's anything left of the man you loved." Olivia listened in silence. She remembered all those bright, ambitious years, the laughter in their kitchen, the feel of his arms around her shoulders, the promise that together they could weather anything. But reality had shattered those illusions. She thought of all she'd lost, her trust, her house, her sense of safety, and everything she'd endured to protect her son and her own integrity. Too often, the world had demanded that she be both the shield and the sacrifice. Yet as Jonathan confessed his solitude, the emptiness of his new, glittering world, and his regret over trading family for ambition, Olivia realized a subtle shift within herself. The anger she'd nursed for so long now felt tired. It did not vanish. Anger never truly does, but she was no longer its captive. The real cost, she realized, was not just the loss of her old life, but in the years she allowed herself to carry bitterness like a stone in her chest. They spoke for nearly an hour. There was no rush to closure, no dramatic confrontation. Olivia told him, honestly and without cruelty, what it had been like. The humiliation, the sleepless nights, the fear for Ethan's happiness. She described how it felt to be scrutinized in court, to be pitied by neighbors, to stitch hope from scraps. Jonathan listened, sometimes choking back tears, sometimes just quietly breathing. It was the closest they had come to understanding each other in years. Before the call ended, Jonathan asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" There was no demand in his voice, only a weary kind of hope. Olivia answered with the gentleness she had learned through suffering. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can just give to make the past go away. It's something I work at every day, not for you, but for myself, so that what happened doesn't own me anymore." That conversation did not change their reality, but in the days that followed, Olivia felt lighter. She realized that forgiveness, true forgiveness, was not about absolving Jonathan or justifying the pain. It was about reclaiming her own story, refusing to let betrayal be its ending. Winter continued, and with it came the small rituals Olivia and Ethan built to keep loneliness at bay. They decorated their apartment with cut paper snowflakes, baked gingerbread cookies, and memorized favorite carols. Ethan was growing, taller, bolder, his laughter breaking through the long, dark evenings. Sometimes, when he struggled with sadness or confusion about his father, Olivia held him and let him cry, never pushing him to move on, only reassuring him that every feeling was allowed. Financially, there were still hard choices. Some days, the cost of rebuilding seemed immeasurable, not just in money, but in energy, in patience, in the courage it took to keep hoping. But Olivia had learned that dignity came in persistence, showing up for her students, her friends, her son, and most importantly, herself. With every bill paid, every lonely night survived, she quietly celebrated her survival. One icy afternoon, Olivia ran into a neighbor she hadn't seen since before the divorce. A woman who had once looked at her with envy, then with pity, and now with an uncertain politeness. There was an awkward pause before she said, "You seem different, lighter." Olivia smiled for real. "I am. Sometimes life just burns everything down so you can plant something new." Her social circle, though changed, was richer for its authenticity. The friends she had now were those who had endured their own trials, women who had weathered miscarriages, layoffs, illnesses, and heartbreak. Together, they swapped stories and recipes, child-sat during emergencies, and confided their most secret doubts. These friendships, born from vulnerability rather than perfection, felt like the truest gift. Jonathan sent the occasional email, progress updates about his therapy, news about his career struggles, notes about Ethan's accomplishments. He never again pushed for sympathy or absolution. But slowly, a kind of truce emerged. On one Sunday, with Ethan in tow, he met them at a park for ice cream. It was awkward. But it was a start. Olivia was surprised to feel not anger, but gratitude. Gratitude that Ethan saw both his parents united, if only for an afternoon, in their love for him. As the winter thawed and the first crocuses pressed up through the frozen earth, Olivia felt a genuine sense of peace blossom in her heart. She sometimes mourned what she and Jonathan had lost. The dream of forever, the home they built, the naive certainty that love was enough. But in their place, she felt something just as valuable: wisdom, acceptance, and the fierce grace that comes when forgiveness is chosen again and again, despite the pain. On a Sunday morning, as the light caught the roses blooming stubbornly on her sill, Olivia brewed a pot of coffee, sat by the window with Daisy, and read a letter she'd written herself at the dark turning point in her life. It was a promise, never to allow bitterness to define her, to make choices from hope rather than revenge, to be always her own beginning. She had paid dearly for the truth, and for her, courage. But at the edge of forgiveness, she found the worth of her own heart. And in that hard-won peace, Olivia knew the greatest victory wasn't in watching someone else finally pay the price. It was in learning to stop paying it herself.